Hey, Internet. This is Nate, and welcome to my video ranking every Swarm survival game, specifically the ones that I have played. So there are several games we're not going to cover today, like the Hollow Cure, because I haven't played it, or the Mobile Magic Survival, because I haven't played it. There's a couple others as well. But we're going to cover 9 different games that I have played. And we're going to talk about what's good about them. We're going to do some comparisons. And then ultimately come up with a tier list of what I think is the current ranking of all the different Swarm survival games. So, with that in mind, here are the games we're going to cover. We're going to cover... let me actually move myself out of the way for the rest. So I am here physically, but I'm going to turn off camera so that you can see all the game and all of the background as we go through. But the games we're going to cover today are 20 Minutes Till Dawn, Rotato, Bone Razor Minions, Bounty of One, Project Lazarus, Nomad Survival, Rogue Genesia, and Soulstone Survivors. Oh, and also Vampire Survivors. We're going to cover those 9 games. Let me start by going through the criteria by which we shall judge these games. So, first off, we're going to talk about the tactical gameplay elements for the game. What that means is like, how do you play in terms of like your actual survival? Specifically, what types of things can you do? Some of the games you can only move. Some of the games you have dashes. Some of the games are more like twin sticks. Some of the games you have to like do certain things to use your abilities. So we're going to talk about all those different like tactical, moment-to-moment gameplay of each of the different games. Then visual style and visual clarity. So I think it's twofold. One, how appealing is the visual style in general? And that's obviously going to be very subjective, but I'm going to totally take control that subjectivity and give you my thoughts. And then visual clarity. How easy is it to know what's happening in the game, where your character is, where the enemies are, and so on. Replayability. So how about the different game modes in the game and unlockables in the game, right? So how much time do I think one can spend with the game and still be enjoying it after so many hours? Variety. So how many characters are there? How many maps are there? How many abilities are there? Meaning every time you do a run, how likely is it that that run will be unique and very different from previous runs? And finally, sound and music. I think it's pretty straightforward. Again, very subjective, similar to visual style. How well do I like the sound and music? Also, hello to people joining. Gabriel, Nobody, and Rona. How you guys doing? Then we will be giving them a grade in each area. So the grading scale will be US American Standard Grade. That means an A equals 4 points, a B equals 3 points, then 2 points, 1 point, and 0 points. And then we will give them an average across all areas to give them an overall score. Now, before we jump into the first grading criteria, I do want to give a little bit of my stats in terms of each game. I think it's helpful to give context. Stat number 1 is playtime. So 20 Minutes Till Dawn, I have played 9 hours. Bone Razor Minion, I've played about 4.5 hours. Bounty of One, about 7.5 hours. Rotato, around 4 hours. Nomad Survival, around 3 hours. Project Lazarus, 5 hours. Rogue Genesia, around 11 hours. Soulstone Survivors, about 5 hours. Well, probably about 9 hours if you consider the prologue as well. And then Vampire Survivors, I've played 745 hours. So there's a little bit of a bias towards ones that I've done, spent a lot more time with. So keep that in mind. But I do think that I hopefully covered anything. But please let me know in the comments if you've spent more time with the game and I'm giving it the shaft. Please let me know in the comments. And the plan is that I'm going to update this because this is basically early access, right? All these games are officially in early access. It'll be very different. It'll be very different once they're fully released. And at that time, my plan will be to update the scores. I would say probably either end of this year, early next year, based on how things have developed. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first criteria. Tactical gameplay elements. So when I say tactical gameplay elements, I'm talking about the moment-to-moment gameplay. What can you do apart from just moving around? Let's start at the beginning with Brotato in D tier. So why is Brotato in D tier? Brotato is a pure movement, meaning there's no buttons that you can push. There's no real objectives on the map. It's really just move around and live. The weapons do themselves. There is no, I would say, positional requirement. It's really just dodge and move, right? And for that reason, given that there's no additional tactical gameplay elements, it's going to sit in the D tier. Next is Nomad Survival. Nomad Survival does add a direction for some abilities, but largely otherwise is just movement. It does have a little bit of map-oriented gameplay, meaning that there are going to be objectives on the map that you have to go for. But still, I would say it was largely very minimal in terms of tactical gameplay. You can move around and you can aim a little bit, and there is a couple of like on-map items. Next up in the C tier, Vampire Survivors, the OG itself. Also very similar. I would say Nomad Survival and Vampire Survivors very similar in terms of their moment-to-moment gameplay. And the only reason why I put Vampire Survivors slightly ahead of Nomad Survival in terms of tactical gameplay is that Vampire Survivors does have more abilities that are a little bit more controllable. Things like Song of Mana, things like even your Santa Waters. There is a little bit more control over how those work and how you can work around your weapons. And in addition, there are kind of meta map things involved. So where Nomad Survival will randomly spawn chests on the ground that you have to go unlock, Vampire Survivors has a lot of map-related stuff that becomes very relevant. Things like picking up accessories or getting objectives and things like that to unlock characters. So just for that reason, I put it in the C tier, but it's very close to D tier. And certainly if you're talking about Vampire Survivors as it was originally released, it would absolutely be in the D tier. Next is Project Lazarus. In terms of map, it's very similar to Nomad Survival. Occasionally there will be objectives on the map that you can go for, but it's largely you just kind of stay in your own confined space. There's not really any meta elements on the map. Where Project Lazarus does do more, and actually I'd put this like a little bit of a Vampire Survivors, is Project Lazarus does have aiming in a twin stick fashion for some weapons, and for some of the different characters. Not all of them though. Some of them are still just aim where you point your guy, but some of them do have twin stick elements, and there is some more tactical stuff with some of the other characters. And for that reason, I think it belongs in the C tier. Still, no buttons that you push. Still no, real tactical movement, but definitely still a little bit better than some of these others where you really just move around and that's all you do. Okay, now we get into the B tier. In the B tier, we introduce our real tactical elements. So Bounty of One has two primary gameplay elements that it adds to the genre. So one is Bounty of One, you're only allowed to fire when you are not moving. So it does create this kind of risk reward of like, when do you move? When do you stay still? In addition, it has a dash. So you can dash through enemies. You can dash around enemies. There are gameplay elements attached to your dash, like bombs and explosions and invulnerability. And so it definitely adds a lot of tactical layers to what is, for a lot of the other games, really just moving around and dodging. You can now dash, and you have this kind of like stopping, attacking, moving type of gameplay. Then we get to Soulstone Survivors, very similar to Bounty of One, except Soulstone Survivors does add a full twin stick, meaning that you can always aim. Not all of your weapons do aim though. A lot of them just kind of automatically happen, especially area-based ones. But there are, I would say, a significant amount of weapons that do have twin stick. And in addition, you still have a dash, and that dash can do more than just, dash sometimes, but normally it's just the dash for defensive purposes. And for that, there's no real on-map objectives. There's no real, objectives on the map. But because you can twin stick and because you can dash, I put it in the B tier. Bone Razor Minions. Now, Bone Razor Minions is a very unique game compared to the others. For one, you don't really have weapons. But unlike the others, not only do you have a dash, you also have spells that you use. And so there's a huge tactical element of like using your spells at the right times, swapping spells out using different objects you can make in your graveyard. There's graveyard setup, which also has its own tactical element where you can lure enemies into traps. You can also use those different things to get like chests and to get pick up goodies. And then of course it has the dash, right? And that dash can also be upgraded with different things. So because there's a lot of like, apart from just deciding on what minions you want to raise, there's a lot of actual other tactical decisions that you make. I'm going to put that right up there in the B tier. And now we have Rogue Genesia. I'm putting Rogue Genesia quite high. And the main reason why is it has the twin stick, it has the dash. But in addition, there's a surprising amount of on-map movement that you have to do. And one thing I did skip about the others that's actually pretty important. Vampire Survivors, Brotato, Nomad Survival, and even Project Lazarus, enemy movement is very, 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 very predictable. Enemies run at you, and sometimes they shoot at you. When we get into these other games, now we have like all new elements. So Bounty of One, for example, you have bosses that have unique abilities. You have enemies that will charge at you. You have enemies that will kind of strafe you and shoot at you. Soulstone Survivors, very similar. You have enemies that will charge at you. You have bosses that have unique abilities. There's tons of area effects that you're dodging. Bone Razor Minions, also unique bosses that have their own unique movements. Enemies that have their own unique movements. And Rogue Genesia also falls into that category of enemies that kind of have their own unique movements and bosses that kind of do very different things. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the A tier. I think the twin stick is the cleanest twin stick out of the others. I think the bosses have very, very interesting like combat compared to some of the others. And then it also has a really good dash mechanic. So based on all those reasons, we're going to put this in the A tier. And finally, 20 Minutes Till Dawn. I actually debated. I almost put 20 Minutes Till Dawn as the only A tier. I think 20 Minutes Till Dawn has the best tactical gameplay, hands down. You're shooting, and it's all twin stick shooting, but you push button to shoot. You have special abilities. Sometimes that special ability is a dash. Enemies all have like pretty, they do have the swarm effect, but there's tons of different bosses with unique abilities that they use. So I think 20 Minutes Till Dawn, definitely I would say the number one in terms of just pure tactical gameplay, with Rogue Genesia kind of right behind that one, and then these kind of B tiers, and then all the rest, which are really just moving around, right? Okay, that's it for tactical gameplay elements. Let's move into visual style and visual clarity. And for this, we're actually going to pull up the games and kind of walk through game by game, the style, and what I would say is the kind of visual clarity, why I'm giving it the grade that I'm doing. Starting at the bottom here, we're going to start with Project Lazarus. So Project Lazarus has this kind of 3D style. Let me just pull it up here real quick. Get it rolling. Has this kind of, again, 3D style. If I jump into the menu real quick here. Oh, there we go. Menu's pretty clean. I will say there's like a lot of empty space, which could be a little bit better. Armory, pretty clean. The settings are pretty clean. So this is all like totally fine. My biggest problem is once you get into the game, even though it has this like pretty good 3D visual style, it is abysmal when it comes to like being able to differentiate enemies from ground. Like, it's so hard, and in my opinion, it's so hard to judge where a lot of enemies are because of how lost they get in all of like the foliage and background. Their colors are very similar. to the background, and the hitboxes in this game are kind of really out of control. So based on that alone, even though it does have like a pretty good visual style, the fact that their lack of clarity is so high in the game, I have to put it quite low. It's by far for me the most frustrating of the games when it comes to trying to understand what's like actually happening. So again, for that reason, we're gonna put it in the D tier. Next up, we have on Nomad Survival. Let's pull up Nomad Survival here. Nomad Survival, I think out of all the games, has the worst menu UI. Like, it's just really, really kind of boring looking. It's all this kind of like blocky, mobile looking text. All the menus look really just so text heavy, with text that's not even that easy to read. There's like way too many options of stuff. There's way too much text every single place you go. It's also like the hardest of all the games to just like get into a game. Like, I have to click on so many things just to get to the play screen. So already, like, just getting into a game for me was just really, really frustrating, because there's just so many menus to get through. It's so hard to know where everything is because there's so many layers to every menu. Once you play, it's like, okay, it's got that kind of, again, mobile game looking style. You know, sprites with a little bit of like this kind of faux 2.5D aesthetic. But I hate like the level up screens. Again, it's just all very blocky. The text is really, really difficult to read. And I would say like even the enemies kind of all move a little bit jank. So again, it's like, I think a lot of people do like this art style, but me personally, I don't love it. I do think that the one redeeming factor it has is that it does have like really good animations on the weapons, but the enemy animations, the kind of general aesthetic, and the text and the blockiness of it, all for me make it look kind of bad. And so for those reasons, I put it into the D tier. Then we switch off. Next up, Bone Razor Minions. Yeah, Bone Razor Minions also in the D tier. Let me pull that one up as well. And let's get it screen here. I have to use a controller for this one. Bone Razor Minions, this like intro side is like fine. I will say the text is pretty, like, it blends in really well with the background. The settings is fine. These all look okay. Nothing too flashy there. Once you get into play game, I find this really difficult to navigate. Again, really heavy on trees. And everything is like way too big to see everything. So like knowing that it's this to play a game, like it's very easy to not even know where do I go to play a game. Then I go in here and then I pick my character and it's like fine, but it's all like really big. And then once you get in game, the biggest problem that I have is like it's really quite chaotic, and it can be very difficult because of the visual style to tell your own projectiles from your own units from enemy projectiles. It's pretty hard to tell enemies from friends. And even though like there's a lot of quirkiness to the visual style, the lack of clarity can become very frustrating once things become really chaotic later on. I think eventually I kind of got a sense of where enemies were at and stuff, but it did take a minute just to get used to like, again, what do my characters look like from others? And there's a lot of times as well where I've gotten hit by things and I don't even understand what hit me because I can't see either the projectiles or the enemies that are hitting me. So even though I do like the style of the game in a lot of ways, the lack again of like visual clarity, which I find very important in these games. I think it's one of the most important aspects of these games is that you know what's going on. And so again, for that reason, I'm putting it in the D tier. Now I'll go to C tier, Bounty of One. So for Bounty of One, I actually think the style is like pretty good in terms of like the visuals itself. Let me quickly switch back in view here so you can take a look as well. Again, I don't hate the visual style. I like that it's kind of this weird Western fantasy theme. The menus all look like okay. So this is all like totally fine. Oh, I don't know why I'm playing with 2 players. Whoopsies. Go back real quick. 1 player, please. However, I will say that the game, similar to some of the criticisms I've given before, does get really clunky with visuals. This is, of all the games that I've played of this genre, for some reason, Bounty of One is the hardest one for me to understand projectiles and where they're coming from. Like, I get hit by so many projectiles in this game. It could just be that I'm bad, but I also think that like the projectiles are very, very difficult to see when there's a lot of them in this game compared to others. But yeah, I mean, the visual style is fine. Like, it's totally fine. I just think that later, when you get into like when enemies are throwing bombs at you and there are projectiles, and a lot of the enemies have very similar designs as you get late game, it becomes really difficult to kind of parse what exactly is going on when it gets like really, really hectic. Even though I do like the visual style, I think it's one of the better like just art styles. Again, lack of visual clarity for me puts it a little bit lower than the others. Then next, Brotato. So Brotato, I actually like the visual style for the most part. It has that kind of Binding of Isaac style, which I think a lot of people like. I'd say it's not like my personal favorite of all time, but it's like totally fine. Did I not open up Brotato? I thought I had opened up Brotato. Let me quickly open up Brotato real quick. I'm almost positive it had opened. I think it accidentally closed. Anyway, let me open it back up. So for Brotato, again, menu is like totally fine. Looks pretty clean. Really obvious visual style. Character styles are all pretty good. But I will say, once you get into the game itself, it's kind of bland. Like, the enemies' designs are kind of bland. Their animations are kind of bland. Like, it's fine. It's very passable. And I would say it does have a little bit better visual clarity than some of the others. What I don't like in Brotato is specifically hitboxes I find to be really jank compared to some of the other games. And, like, I mean, some of the stuff, like it looks passable. Like, it's fine. You know, just, like, big gradient background. But I don't know. I don't love the visuals as much as with some of the other games. But I will give it points for being having a little bit more visual clarity than some of the others. I find the bullets really easy to read. It's very easy to tell your projectiles from enemy projectiles, in my opinion. So for all those reasons, I think it's like quite good. But I still think that maybe I just personally don't love the visual style that much. And so I'm going to keep it in the C tier. Even though visual clarity is quite good, I think the overall style is just not my personal favorite. And I think some of this is just very plain looking, like the level up screens and some of the backgrounds. Next is... Oh, let me turn off... Oh, wait, it's off. Okay. Next is Vampire Survivors in the B tier. Vampire Survivors is a weird one. It's a little bit of a weird one for several reasons. Vampire Survivors also closed on me. Dirtbag game. Won't stay open. Maybe there's like a limit to how many games people let me have open at a time. There we go. Okay. Menu is like fine. It has this definitely like early Nintendo style visualizations. I would say there's not too many deep trees to get into the game. Most things are single click to get to where you want, which is quite good. Once you get into the menus, I think this is all fine. You get a lot of like data and stats. It's not like the cleanest UI, but it's like okay. Certainly better than some of the ones we've looked at before. I think where Vampire Survivors for me really shines is in character design. Like, look how different every character is. Look how much color there is. Like, it's very, very stylistic, and kind of fully embraces its, sprite, NES style roots. Once you get into game, again, a lot of like visual flourishes, like all this stuff with the arcanas in the background, the treasure chests, like it's all very, very, very stylistic and over the top. And I really, really like that. Like, this is where the game really shines, is in these like little flourishes. That you don't even need this. You could just have this menu, but instead you have like all this stuff happening on screen that just makes it feel a lot more alive than some of the other games when they have like their level up or selection screens. So then let's just grab one here and just go. Again, I would say very, very good visual clarity. Hitboxes are like very, very good. Like, look how like I can really see whether the enemy hits me or not, and I can kind of judge that pretty well. Some of the bottom hitboxes are pretty bad, but in general, like, really, I think it's quite good visual clarity. This screen in particular, still, like, you have all this stuff just happening. Like, it's really nice. Really like this. All that's like kind of going on in the background. Weapon effects look really, really nice. Especially the later, the weapons that came later in development, I think all have really, really impressive animations. Map background's pretty plain, and there are moments late in the game where visual clarity does suffer because your weapons have such like crazy effects that it can cover what's happening on screen, and it's often that you'll just die because your Labora was blocking the enemies, or because your lasers were obscuring enemies and things like that. So like, for that reason, it's not an A tier. I think there are games that have a little bit better visual clarity, and I think there are some like a little bit more stylistic games. But all in all, I think it's a really, really solid art design, pretty good visual clarity, and like really, really great animations. And so for those reasons, I'm keeping it in the B tier. Soulstone Survivors. Soulstone Survivors has this kind of like voxel look. Whoops, didn't actually click this. This kind of like voxel look style, right? Kind of blocky, polygonish. Menu UI, I think, is pretty clean. Probably one of the better UIs in the game. I like how it animates as you go from thing to thing. Like, I think that's really cool. I would say the skill tree isn't my favorite screen, but like all the rest look like really nice. The setting screens all very clear. Like, I like this. I think this is really good UI. I will say that it's not, one thing I don't love is knowing that you actually have to push the select character screen is a little bit weird. I think you could have just done that in the fight screen. I don't know why these are two separate ones, but okay, minor UI thing. And then once you get into the game, I think it actually looks like really nice. Like, a lot of good variety on the maps, tons of things. The enemies look pretty good. The animations of the weapons look really good. It does have a little bit of visual clarity problems when there's like way too many circles. So you'll have circles from your own weapons and circles from enemy weapons, and that can kind of obscure a lot of what's happening, which can get kind of frustrating. But I would say that's only in the real late game. And there are options, which I appreciate, where you can actually reduce or increase the transparency, or reduce the transparency of visual effects, make it easier. So I really, really appreciate that. And certainly I have mine, I mean, you saw it turned down quite a bit. Level up screens all look really nice. Selection screens all look really nice. I think the UI here just is really, really clean. Animation's really, really clean. I think one of the better games in terms of just clean UI, clean visuals. Just getting knocked down because, again, later in the game can get very, very hectic. Can get difficult to see which circles are enemy circles and which circles are your circles. But again, a lot of that can be improved just by turning down special effect or increasing special effect transparency. And for that, like, really good style, really clean animations, really clean UI, with a little bit of visual clarity problems. I'm going to go ahead and keep that one right there in the B tier. Next up, 20 minutes till dawn. So 20 minutes till dawn has this kind of what's the best way to describe it? This kind of like, I don't know, dark, contrasty, red, gray, blue sort of color scheme, which I think looks quite nice. Everything definitely feels very vibrant when there are colors because they contrast so much with the grays and kind of gray shades and things like that. I really like the UI here. I think it's, again, one of the better UIs. It's very simple. You click play. You have your characters at the top. Huge visualization of the character, which I really appreciate. And then you have your weapons at the bottom. Very clear what all the weapons do. And then you play. Like, it's just not... I mean, you have the runes, I guess. But, like, there's just not a lot that you need to get through in terms of menus. And then you have your modes. So I think it's one of the cleanest UIs out of all of them. Very similar to, like, Soulstone Survivor. And then once you get in game, I think it has really, really, really strong visual clarity. Like, really obvious where enemies are for the most part. Like, I guess there is some obscurity with trees now that I'm actually playing the game. But in general, I find it to be very, very strong visual style. I really, really like all the weapon effects. I like the enemy visuals as well. They do kind of get a little bit samey. But I think with the new map as well, there were a few new enemies added that kind of like increases it. But visual clarity, very, very strong. Animations, very, very cool. And I like this, in general, the kind of art style. It's one that is a little bit unique. There's a few games that I've played outside of this that have this kind of similar style, but I really like it. It does get a little bit bland if you've played a lot of it. Like, I would say after like 8 or 9 hours, it definitely starts to all kind of get into that same color scheme. So I would have liked a little bit more contrasting color. But in general, I actually really like the style, and I find it to be one of the more visually clear swarm survival games compared to the others. And for the fact that it has such good, clean visuals, and the animations are all very cool looking, very heavy on effects, I'm going to go ahead and keep that one up there in the B tier. Next up, we have Rogue Genesia. Yeah, Rogue Genesia. Definitely, I think the top tier when it comes to visual styles. Like, it is impressive that someone made a visual style like this in a swarm survival game. So if you haven't played it yet, it has this kind of cardboard 3D style. First off, the menu's like pretty clean. Like, it's pretty clean. Some of the things that I would change about the menu, I don't love the tiering aspect of it. Can get kind of confusing. And some of like these sub menus are like, I don't know why you only could have 5. I think you could have more and not have it be too cluttered. So this I don't like. I don't like having to sort through all the pages. So the UI there is not great, but I think it more than makes up for it in like visual presentation here. Like, this looks awesome. Just look how good this looks, man. It's so nice looking. Just definitely a step above all the other games in terms of just how clean it looks. This, again, this kind of like cardboard cutout 2.5D style looks really, really nice. It's going to be a little jank because we have way too many games loaded right now. But yeah, like, I love this art style. I think it looks really, really nice. And it's when you first play it, or when you watch it especially, I think it looks like it could be really, really difficult to play and judge. But I feel like when you play it, it's actually surprisingly clear where enemies will hit you. And like I've never really had problems with like, oh man, I got hit by something I don't understand. Like, I feel like it's always very clear where enemies are, where they're going, and where your character is in the hitboxes. Like, it's all very clean, surprisingly clean. Because I think, again, at first glance, it looks like it might be difficult. But once you play it, I find that it's very, very easy to kind of tell all those things. I think the menus in the, the style of like level ups, I think all look very nice. All the particle effects look really good, and they don't obscure your vision. That's one thing that a lot of the games have problems with, is like these big effects, like big Vampire Survivors effects. They obscure what's going on. I feel like I never get confused about like what's going on in Rogue Genesia. So for all those reasons, the fact that it has, I think, the best looking visual style and yet still has extremely high visual clarity, for me, puts this one in the A tier. And I think that's much. That's everything to do with visual style, visual clarity. Let's move on to the next topic. Replayability, game modes and unlockables. So starting with the D tier, we have Project Lazarus. Project Lazarus has exactly one game mode. It is play the game. That's it. There's not really that much in unlockables. It's basically earn currency and unlock stuff. Not much else to it. For me, it's one of the least replayable of the entire genre, because there's just not more to do. There's just, the one mode, and then you earn currency to buy more stuff. If you've beaten it, there's nothing further. Soulstone Survivors. Again, there is one mode. It is play the game. Where Soulstone Survivors is a little bit better than Project Lazarus is you can get those currencies to unlock new weapons, and those weapons are not just like improvements, they actually are more content. So the fact that those weapons unlock new starting abilities, so there is something to unlock in the game, I think puts it a little bit above, but still it's like not very good. Surprisingly low content and replayability in Soulstone Survivors. Brotato, there's one mode. It's play Brotato. Why this is not in the D tier is because Brotato does have the unlockables. You can unlock weapons, which is like pretty good. And it does have a 5-tier ascension mode, which is okay. But basically that's it. There's just the one game mode, and there's not really any way to change that apart from just increasing difficulty with ascension. And so for that reason, it stays here in the C tier. Bounty of One. It's basically the same as Brotato. Yes, there is like a couple characters you can unlock, and there is an ascension mode, and you can technically go endless when you're done, but that's it. Like very, very few gameplay affecting unlocks, and there's really only the one game mode, which is just the game mode with ascension. And I didn't feel like the ascension mode itself provided like a ton of new stuff. At least Brotato's ascension includes like new enemies and new enemy patterns and stuff. Bounty of Ones is just like enemies do more damage, you have less damage, like you take more damage. Like it's I don't know. I felt like the ascension mode was kind of lacking altogether as well. Now we go into the B tier, Rogue Genesia. Rogue Genesia has two big game modes. It has endless mode, which is very similar to all the other games, but damn, its standard mode is really good. Really, really, really good. It does only have the two modes, and it does only have 2 difficulties on the one mode unlocked so far. I think eventually this one will definitely bump up, but as of right now, the only thing putting it from the C tier, the only reason why it's in the B tier is just because that that one Slay the Spire style map progression mode is so fun, and it's so different to all the other just survive for 30-minute modes that it puts it into the B tier. Otherwise, it would definitely be in the C tier with just having the 2 modes. 20 Minutes Till Dawn has 3 different modes, and I think it has one of the best ascension modes in the game as well. It's kind of similar to Bounty of One, but I think it has a little bit more uniqueness than Bounty of One. As well, there's a lot more to unlock in 20 Minutes Till Dawn. I should also mention that there's lots to unlock in Rogue Genesia too, that are actually gameplay affecting unlocks. And so the fact that it has several different ways to play, and it has an ascension mode, and it has a lot of things to unlock, puts it into the B tier. Bone Razor Minions also has quite a bit to unlock, but it has like a lot of game modes. It's got standard mode, it's got an ascension mode where every single ascension has a completely different map. It has challenge modes, which include a daily and a weekly challenge. It has like this random ass card game. Like, it's not a good card game, but it has its own card game. And there's a lot to unlock. So surprisingly, Bone Razor Minions has like a significant number of game modes and unlockables in it. And for that reason, I'm putting it into the B tier. Then we get to Vampire Survivors. Vampire Survivors, in terms of game modes, really only has game mode plus modifier. So you have hyper mode, you have hurry mode, you can choose to have limit breaks or not, you can choose to have arcanas or not. But like, honestly, in terms of unlockables, there is no rival. No game has so many damn secrets, so many unlockables, so many achievements as Vampire Survivors. If it didn't have all of that, if it was just the maps and the gameplay modes, I think it would sit somewhere between the C and the B tier. But because there's so damn much to unlock in the game, and all of them require you to play in all these different styles, I have to keep it in the A tier. There's just so much you can unlock. Hours and hours of content that is gameplay affecting content. It's not just check the box. Like, all of them unlock new maps and new characters and new abilities. And so for that reason, Vampire Survivors definitely goes in the A tier, as well as Nomad Survival. Nomad Survival has a ton of flexibility in how you play. You can decide how much enemies hit you. You can decide how much experience you get. There are challenge modes. There are tons and tons and tons of unlockables. Like, I think it probably, in terms of just raw game modes, probably has more game modes than all the rest combined. And just tons of unlockables. And for that reason, definitely has to go into the A tier. I think you can get a lot. If you like Nomad Survival, I think you can get a lot out of it in terms of just trying out all the different challenges and game modes and things like that. Next up is Variety. How many characters, maps, and abilities you have. And there's a little bit of blur between Variety and Replayability, but I think it's a little bit different. We're going to really just talk about Variety is more like, if you do a run and then you do another run, how similar are those runs going to feel? And how many different types of runs can you do in the game? Starting in the D tier, we have Soulstone Survivors. As much as I like Soulstone Survivors, all of the runs with every character kind of feels the same. Like, they're all kind of the same. Like, you have the option to get every single weapon. And I feel like in terms of upgrades, you basically get to upgrade your weapon one time, and then there's some kind of generic abilities that you upgrade. And again, there's only 6 characters in the game, and then each character has 2 different starting weapons. But the characters, they kind of all feel the same to me. They have some different starting stats and a different starting weapon, but you can basically turn any character into any build. And similarly, all the builds kind of feel the same for me. So, I don't know. Soulstone Survivor, I really like it, but in terms of variety, it's still very, very early on. Now, this one definitely could get better as it gets out of early access, but as of right now, with only, depending on which version you're doing, 3 characters with 2 weapons or 6 characters with 2 weapons, and basically a lot of it ending up feeling the same, it goes in the D tier for me. Bounty of 1, kind of the same. Bounty of 1, you only have 1 weapon, which is the thing you shoot. Each character does have a starting ability, but you can actually get every other character starting ability as a pickup throughout the game. And it always ends up being the same. It's, you walk and you stop and fire, and sometimes that way that you fire looks slightly different. You do have like the dash, so there's some like dynamic tactical movement. But in terms of variety, there's only 5 characters, and there's only the 1 weapon, and there's not really a lot of unique upgrades. Like, every build ends up being crit build or, big area dash build. Like, that's all you get. So it's just, I feel like Bounty of 1 always kind of feels the same, regardless of what character you pick. C tier is Project Lazarus. Project Lazarus also only has 5 characters, but the 5 characters play completely differently. in terms of their tactical movement. There's also quite a few different weapons, then the weapons actually feel quite different from each other. I will say it's not balanced. It's not a balanced game at all. There are definitely better weapons and worse weapons, but the variety I think is quite strong. And I like that it's not just like increased stat. Yes, there are increased stat things, but there's also being able to actually upgrade the weapon that you have. You can have multiple weapons. And in general, I feel like Project Lazarus, I have very different builds each time that I play, especially depending on which characters that I pick. Still not great, and it's very imbalanced, but I do feel like the runs feel different run to run. Rogue Genesia, kind of like a better Soulstone Survivor, because I do feel like the different weapons you pick actually greatly affect the run. But there's only one character. Like, there's genuinely only one character. Yes, there's a lot of weapons. Yes, there's a ton of upgrades. But there's only one character. There's only really one map. I guess there's two maps technically, but they play out exactly the same. So they do tend to, like, there is some variety in Rogue Genesia where, you know, you'll play one run, the next run will feel a little bit different. But honestly, they kind of all feel relatively in the ballpark, with runs either being heavy weapon or they go heavy defense, in my opinion. Bone Razor minions. Yeah, like, the game has really good tactical play, and there are some differences in the characters. But again, there's only 5 different characters. I do like that each character has meta progression. I think that's quite good. And I also like that there are different maps in terms of, like, graveyard structure, but it's always just the same kind of graveyard. The enemies are always just kind of the same. And there is a variety of abilities, but honestly, the spells are so low impact that I feel like they don't really make the runs feel different. Like, Bone Razor minions always feels the same. You're summoning minions, and you're just trying to get the best minions you can. Yes, sometimes you have more minions, sometimes you have demons, sometimes you have giants, but it's basically very similar each time, with some minor differences depending on how you set up your graveyard and which character you pick. But largely feels the same, similar to like Rogue Genesia. Then we get to Brotato. Brotato has a lot of characters. I mean, you can see it in the background here. A lot of different characters, and I would say they're very Soulstone Survivor in terms of like the fact that they just kind of start a little differently. But like, there's so many of them. If Soulstone Survivor had this many characters with the same kind of like flexibility that it has, it would be up here in the B tier. But it doesn't. It only has like 3 or 6. Brotato has like 30. So even though Brotato's characters don't all feel completely different, there's enough of them that I think it kind of pushes how different they feel. And I think there's a pretty big difference between a Brotato melee run and a Brotato elemental run, and a Brotato engineering run, and a Brotato ranged run. Like, they actually do feel quite a bit different from each other in how you play. Whether you go defensive, whether you go offensive, like, there's a lot of variety in Brotato. Surprising to me how much variety there is, especially with the full release. So for that reason, I'm putting it in the B tier. Next is 20 Minutes Till Dawn. 20 Minutes Till Dawn has, I think, 8 or 9 characters and like 8 weapons. So quite a lot of variety. The weapons all feel quite different. But in the end, they're all just shoot gun. Yes, the gun may shoot differently depending on which gun you pick, but it's all shoot gun. And the characters, while they are different, they really only differ in that they have a different passive / special ability. Otherwise, they're more or less identical. And there are kind of several archetypes that you might play, but they tend to kind of all blur together. Like, you have a summon build that kind of feels a little bit different than a shooting build. And there's a shooting build that kind of feels a little bit different than like an elemental shooting build. And then I think there's enough variety that they do feel pretty different run to run. And I think what makes 20 Minutes Till Dawn quite good compared to a lot of the others is that you can play the different types, like summoning versus elemental versus smite versus, like, you can play different types of runs, and they're pretty balanced now. Like, they weren't for a long time. But recently, as I've been playing it, I actually feel like they're all pretty well balanced at this point, which is quite nice. And the characters do have a different enough feel that it's going to be better than some of these other ones. So still not the most variety, but definitely more variety than the others, just because of the fact that it has so many different characters and so many different guns you can start with, and you can combine them to make different types of builds. Then we get to Vampire Survivors. Vampire Survivors has 25 standard characters, another 10 secret characters. It has so many weapons, and the fact that you're limited to 6 weapons and 6 accessories means that your runs can feel quite a bit different. And even though the characters are not like that different from each other, I do feel like character plus map plus your build, like you can have runs that feel very, very different from each other. So I think it's like kind of on the edge, to be honest. I would say this is right on the edge of being A tier, B tier. But the fact that, again, there's so many characters and there are secret characters and they all kind of feel slightly different from each other. And there's enough weapons that you can have very different combinations of weapons. And there's enough accessories that it kind of feels a little bit different. And the maps kind of force you to play a little bit differently. And there are so many different maps. Like all those combined just edge it into the A tier. But definitely there's a lot of like similarities between the different builds in Vampire Survivors. It's just the sheer amount of content pushes it over the edge. But I feel like a lot of the others would kind of get to that same spot if they just had more characters, more weapons, and things like that. And then the true A tier is Nomad Survival, because it has, again, a lot of different characters, and they actually all play very differently from each other. And then they all have a different, like, background, I think is what, I can't remember the word for it, but it's their, like, origin or whatever, also makes them play very differently. Also, there's tons of different weapons and abilities. And all of that combines with the, different maps. All of that combines into having, like, a lot of variety in Nomad Survival compared to all the others. It doesn't have as many characters as Vampire Survivors. It doesn't have as many weapons as Vampire Survivors, but they're so different from each other. And the combinations, plus all the variety of maps, I think it does put it for me also into the A tier. All right, next up is sound and music. And for the sound and music, we're going to pause our music here, because I want to show you some of the sounds, or have you listened to some of the sounds in the music to kind of illustrate the different ratings that I'm going to give each of the games. So first off, Project Lazarus. Let me get into Project Lazarus, and let's pump up the music and pump up the sound. Oh, sorry, let me just roll in a bit. Oh, it's not showing. Oh, sorry, I don't want to show it on the screen. Hold on, let me go back. My bad. Hopefully you can hear this okay. Maybe I'll pump it up a little bit louder. But basically for me, let's make it really loud. It's just kind of dead sounding. The music is kind of bland. And the effects, like, they just kind of all sound kind of cheap. Like, I don't listen to this and think, wow, this is like big hype. The music's probably the worst out of all the games that we've covered here. And the sound design is just really, really bland compared to a lot of the other games. And so for that reason, it goes directly into the D tier. Next up, even though I kind of spoiled it already, Soulstone Survivors. Pull up Soulstone Survivors really quick. We can do the sound there as well. It's like decent sounding. The music is kind of ethereal, which is kind of nice. The effects sound okay. Like, it's all fine. There's nothing wrong with any of this. But it's not, like, I would say, particularly big hype. And, like, even the level ups, they kind of all sound... I mean, they sound fine. The attacks all sound okay. But it's just... It's more on the mellow side than exciting. Nothing feels particularly impactful, and the music is just kind of there. Nothing too special. And for that reason, it goes directly into the C tier for me. Pump up the jam. I will pump up the jam. All right, next up. Next up is Brotato. So actually, okay, let's just go into the music here, and you can hear it yourself. I actually really like the music in Brotato. I don't love the sound effects too much, to be honest. But, like, the music is good. Definitely get your blood pumping. And the effects, like, the sound effects are pretty, like, impactful. Heavy hits, big shots, big smacks. When you get hit, it really feels like you got hurt. There's just a lot going on, but it's also pretty clear what's happening, and the music is really pumping. But it's not the best. I think the sound effects are definitely where it falls short. The music is, like, really good, but the sound effects in general feel a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too artificial. But in general, I mean, I don't mind this at all. This is totally fine. And for that reason, I think it fits really nicely into that C tier, where the music is, like, pretty good, get your blood flowing, but in general, the sound effects are kind of, like, not that great. Or the sound itself is not that great. Okay, next up is 20 Minutes Till Dawn. Well, 20 Minutes Till Dawn. Here again, music is, like, you know, it's fine. And then when you get into the game, you know, you get this kind of, like, ambient music, which is fine. I would say the sound effects are definitely better than, like, Brotato's. But, like, do you feel like I'm on the edge of death all the time? Apart from the music, like, if there was no music, the sound effects don't feel like there's, like, tons of things coming at me all the time, right? Kind of feels... No, it sounds okay. And the music is, like, good ambient noise. But I would say similar to, like, Soulstone Survivors, it just kind of sounds fine. Very samey sounding. Not a ton of sound complexity. And then just kind of some ambient music. And so for those reasons, I'm keeping it right there in the C tier along with Brotato and Soulstone Survivor. Next up, Rogue Genesia. Now, Rogue Genesia is a funny one because I actually think the sound effects are quite good. Let me pump up those sound effects real quick. Option. The sound effects are quite good, but the music is, like, very meh. I like the, you know, slow leveling up sound. And the hit shot's, like, very unique and different. But the music is, like, really mediocre. Like, there's some good sound effects in here. But, like, that music's not, like, getting me going. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of... It's just kind of there. I think sound effects much better than the music. I think if this game gets better music, this would definitely be, like, B tier, potentially even A tier if they also improve a little bit of the sound quality as well. But I do really love the sound effect of, like, things leveling up. the slowly, you know, higher tone as you get closer and closer to your next level up and stuff like that. But again, this kind of just ambient general bass with some like notes. Not very exciting. And so for those reasons, again, like many of the others, just kind of sits there in the C tier. A lot of games sitting in the C tier for sound. All right, but now we're no longer in the C tier. Let's see what B tier sounds like. So Nomad Survival. I find Nomad Survival to be like surprisingly punchy with its music. Let's oh yeah, that's the stuff. Awesome sounds. Good. I think the sound effects are not that great, but the music is like so damn infectious for me. And then if I feel like, you know what, I need to like chill down a bit, a little bit too heavy for me, then I can just switch it into this kind of like low-key music. And the sounds here are like really nice. You hear a lot of sounds, me picking up gems, hitting enemies. And like both soundtracks are like pretty good. This ambient sound is kind of on par with like, you know, Rogue Genesia or some of the others, Rogue Genesia or Soulstone Survivors. But man, the fact that it has that like super punchy beat is just really, really big hype. And for the fact that it has, multiple different styles of music, and the sound effects themselves are like actually really solid, for me puts this Nomad Survival first game in the B tier. We just want to listen to that for a little bit. Nice. And you have a lot of, by the way, you have a lot of like options. You can actually turn off item sound effects, which is just a nice touch if you don't like that particular sound. Let's continue. Next up, Bounty of One. I think Bounty of One probably has the most thematically consistent soundtrack in the game. Let's pump up the sound here. Let's jump into options real quick. Excuse me. I believe I was trying to turn on the music. You get this like nice like Western style theme. And then you get this nice like Western style music. I also like that the enemies make a noise when they die. Hold on. There is some other music going on. What is the other music going on? Is it just Bounty of One? No, it sounds like it's... There we go. It was 20 minutes till dawn. But yeah, this one just sounds nice and punchy. Really big hype. I love the level up sound as well, where you get this like really nice clean sound, enemy sounds. I think it's one of the better, again, thematic songs. Definitely feels like it fits the game super, super well. And the sounds all sound really nice. The dash is really punchy. The shots get really punchy. The enemies kind of yell and get sad when they die. The effects get really good noises as well. Just in general, really, really like the sound design in this game. But yeah, also just the music is really nice. And for that reason, Bounty of One sits nicely into the B tier. Vampire Survivors, the first A tier. The Vampire Survivors, if you were to go off of the original release of Vampire Survivors, would definitely not be A tier. But as the game's evolved, there is just a ton. First off, a ton of music. Let's turn on sound and music here real quick. You have the secrets music. Very nice and ominous for the secrets. Then you have all these different soundtracks and different styles of those same soundtracks. And they're all like so intense. Like, it definitely has that Castlevania soundtrack feel. So I think it's thematically very, very on brand. But just the variety of music is so good. And then we get into like the actual sounds, right? Which all have that very NES feel. It's very punchy. When you get hit, there's a sound. When you level up, it's really like, not to mention the treasure chest music, which is just absolutely incredible. The first 200 times you hear it. Each weapon has its own sound effect that makes it completely unique. There's just a lot of layering to the sound. I just love it. I think it's, out of all the games, just the sheer amount of sounds and music, it's amazing. It's incredible that this game has so much, considering, you know, what kind of game it is. But yeah, definitely it benefits from having had the most time to develop. But man, the investment into sound and music in this game is just surprising. And part of the reason why I love the game so much, because I think it has such good music and such good sound. Even after 700 hours, I still love all the music in this game. Super, super clean, super nice. Feels just very, very heavy. Feels like there's a lot going on. And for that reason, it goes into the A tier. Turn off that. And last, Bone Razor Minions. Dude, this game, maybe this will be controversial, but I love the sound and music in Bone Razor Minions. I think it's amazing. Let me just pump up some of the music here real quick. Where are we? So you have this like really hilarious menu music, then I love the sound design. It totally feels like an old style NES, you know, Pokemon soundtrack. It's so good. And the sound design is so weird and unique and different. And every time you get through a wave, you get a completely different soundtrack. It's incredible. I think the sound design in this game is so good compared to so many of the others, which just kind of have this generic sounding to it. This has its own thing. Like, this is very much its own music, own sound design. I love it. And then you get into the menu, man, and even the menu, like if I go to the title here, oh, it's so good. It's so good, guys. It doesn't have quite the like uniqueness of Vampire Survivors, the sheer amount of music and sound, but damn, the music is so good that it does have, and the sound design is so unique and fits the styles so well that for me, it's up there in the A tier for sound. All right, so sound and music done. Now we move into the end. So that's all the criteria. Let's talk about them as a final grade. Starting with our poor little border dropout here, Project Lazarus, with a score of 1.4. So keep in mind, 4.0 is the perfect score. 1.0 would be like trash tier. Project Lazarus is just above trash tier. Let me turn on some music while we're finishing this off. And the reason why Project Lazarus, I think overall, struggles is it just didn't keep getting developed, right? Like, there's been no progress in the game, no new content. What's already there is very imbalanced. The music and sound design is very poor. And it just never really got its footing. I think with more love behind the game, definitely could go up in rating, but it would need quite a bit improvement to kind of get it on par with a lot of the other games in the genre. Next up, Brotato with a score of 2.0. Despite the visual style and despite the amount of characters and things like that, I find Brotato to really be lackluster in terms of like actually game to game feeling really good. Its sound and visual design is just okay. And as much as it just has like a sheer amount of content, I just find the core gameplay of it to just not be that great. And none of it is like incredible. Like it's all just good or okay. And then the gameplay itself is just kind of meh. And for that reason, it's not the worst. It's definitely like, I think there's opportunities for it to get a lot better, but I definitely feel like the core gameplay just isn't on par. Similarly with Project Lazarus, isn't on par with a lot of the other games, but it is definitely a step up from Project Lazarus for me. Next up, Bounty of One with a 2.2. Bounty of One is honestly just lacking content. It just doesn't have a lot going for it right now. It still feels incomplete. You literally fight the same things every time. There's only one map. Even though it does have this uniqueness where you have to stop to fire, there's really not a lot of variety in the runs. They all kind of feel the same. Why it's not, down with Project Lazarus is really because the music and visual design is just way better. And the tactical gameplay is just a little bit more interesting. But still, just like opposite of Brotato, where Brotato has all the content and very little quality to that content, I think Bounty of One has almost zero content, but the content it has is quite quality. Now, Soulstone Survivors 2.2. I think Soulstone Survivors and Bounty of One have a lot of the same problems, with some like minor differences. Like Soulstone Survivor has worse sound and music design, but has slightly better variety than Bounty of One. I think the tactical gameplay is a little bit better than Bounty of One, but they also both just lack content. And I think those ones, you pump up the content in both of these games, and they're definitely the best in the genre. They just don't have a lot right now. I think that once they go crazy with content, I think they'll definitely increase their scores by quite a lot. Nomad Survival with a 2.6. Nomad Survival, out of all the games, has the most modes, has the most customizability, has really good variety, but honestly, the core gameplay just isn't my favorite. It's fine, but it's just not. I don't feel like it has as like the tactical gameplay in it is so weak, and the visual style for me is so off-putting that, and the UX is just god awful. But I think if it could improve in those areas, add a little bit of tactical elements, do an overhaul of the visuals, and just completely clean up the UX, I think it would be one of the better games in the genre. But for those that don't mind all of those things, I think it's probably their favorite one out of all of them, just because of the amount of replayability that the game has with all the different modes and challenges and characters and stuff. Bone Razor Minions with a 2.6. I think Bone Razor Minions honestly excels in just like the audacity of the game to sound so good. It plays really well. I think it's really, really fun. It's got its own unique style, very different from all the others, where it's like just going all in on this summon style gameplay. However, things that kind of knock it back, really poor visual clarity. The UX is pretty bad. And there's not really a ton of variety. You're mostly just summoning very similar styles of minions. I think if there could be more unique styles of minions tied to each character, if the characters felt different from each other in a better way, and the UX was given an overhaul to make it a little cleaner, I think it would become much better compared to some of the others. Then we have Rogue Genesia with a 3.0. Rogue Genesia, I think this out of all the games has the best potential. It suffers from lack of content, but it does have the single best game mode out of all of the swarm survival genre. That like, you know, Slay the Spire style mode is so good that every other swarm survival should pick it up because it's so fun. And in general has an incredible visual style. It's honestly only held back by content and the really crappy music. So if it gets better music and just adds a lot more content, easily the best in the genre by far. Like it has, I think, the best foundation out of all of the games that we've covered. In terms of the tactical gameplay, the game modes itself, and the potential to add content in a very meaningful way are all there for Rogue Genesia. 20 Minutes Till Dawn, also a 3.0. I think 20 Minutes Till Dawn is a great example of being like good at everything, but never excelling. And I think what really holds 20 Minutes Till Dawn back from being the best in the genre is that it needs to have a little bit more variety in terms of the actual play styles that you do. I think they're just a little bit too samey, and there's just not enough of variety right now to push it into being the best in the genre. But it does currently have the most fun tactical combat, I think, out of all of them. It really is more of like that edge between a twin stick shooter and a swarm survival game. And I think it does really well sitting in that position. But if it were to get more maps with like more uniqueness than just like, you know, a bigger box, smaller box, and if it were to have a little bit more content that kind of like pushed builds in different directions, I think it could definitely also be the best in the genre. And finally, we come to Vampire Survivors with a 3.4. Not a perfect game, but what puts Vampire Survivors above all the rest is its superior sound and music, its great visuals and visual clarity, and just the sheer amount of content and replayability through its achievements. And that every achievement has an unlock behind it. And there's just so many different ways to play Vampire Survivors, so many different maps. Even on those maps, you can tweak kind of how you want to play them between the hurry mode and the hyper mode and all those kinds of things. Where Vampire Survivors still struggles is it has one of the weakest core gameplay foundations out of all the games. There's really nothing tactical about it apart from go to place and survive while going there. So I definitely think if Vampire Survivors is going to remain on the throne, there would have to be either just like a shit ton of more content to keep the variety going, or some tweaks to the foundation to add more tactical elements to the gameplay. Otherwise, I see this very quickly being surpassed by other games like Soulstone Survivors, Bounty of One, Rogue Genesia, or even 20 Minutes Till Dawn. So those are my rankings. Hope you guys enjoyed. But before I end the video, I have one last thing. And these are my ideas and recommendations for the genre. This is not game specific. This is what, if I were to build the perfect swarm survival game, on top of the elements we've already talked about, these are things that I think would really push the genre in a very healthy and sustainable direction. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a game developer, but these are just things that I think make games in general quite good, and I think they would fit the style of game quite well. Number 1, meta progression tied to a story, similar to Loop Hero or Rogue Legacy. I think Rogue Genesia opened up that kind of like having a run that's across multiple individual survival segments. Now, if you could expand that out into a larger story where, I don't know, you're the king of a kingdom, and every time you play, you know, you're getting into harder and harder maps, but then those maps give you the ability to unlock meta to get more weapons, or to get, you know, more abilities, or to get things like that, right? I think that could be a really, really awesome way to still have that gameplay. Think of like, even like Dynasty Warriors, right? Where like you have the Dynasty Warrior strategic layer, and then you have the moment-to-moment gameplay in-game. I think a thing like that would be super cool. Next, Competitive multiplayer. The only competitive multiplayer mode I think works in this genre is the Tetris 99 approach, where everybody's playing the same map with the same character with the same upgrades, and it's whoever lasts the longest wins, and there would be some way to affect other players. So it's a battle royale, but you're not fighting against each other in a map. You're fighting against each other in length of survival. Whoever survives the longest wins. I think that would be a fantastic game. A survival game that's competitive, where you're just trying to outlast the other players the best you can, with the same kind of like base rules in play and the base same character, same map, same upgrades. More character and weapon specific progression. The only game that's really touched on this, I would say so far, has been Soulstone Survivors, where you can kind of like unlock new abilities for the same character. But I'd love to see a kind of like dive into a character getting better the more that you play them, or a weapon getting better the more that you play them. Instead of just becoming generally better, really like having like a handful of characters and they unlock new abilities, either through a skill tree or through like a leveling system by playing that character over and over again, or playing that weapon over and over again. I think would be super cool. And I find that way more interesting than get currency, use currency, which is the typical way most progression happens in these games right now. More tactical elements. I mean, this is very obvious, especially for games like Brotato, Swarm Survivor, Nomad Survival. More tactical elements would make it a lot better. Oh, you're totally right, MJ. The other good example is Bone Razor Minions, where, but I would even say with Bone Razor Minions, it's still not based on you playing, it's based on you getting currency. But anyway, sorry, more tactical elements. Yeah, dashing, twin stick shooting, special abilities. Like, even just having, like, similar to Bone Razor Minions, a spell where you can use this spell while you're trying to survive, but you only get one of them per run or two of them per run, or you have to kill a certain amount of enemies to recharge it. Like, something to be more than just walk around and survive for a lot of these games. I think it's like mandatory for them to become sustainable. I don't think they need to be like complex, full-on twin stick bullet hells, but I do think that having a little bit more tactical play would improve most of the games. And you see that with games like Rogue Genesia, with Soulstone Survivor, Bounty of One. Those little bit of tactical differences make the games a little bit more interesting. And finally, and this is going to be my call to action for every frickin' roguelite developer ever. Stop doing frickin' generalist progression systems that are just auto better. They are not fun. I know a lot of people love them, but I hate them. I think that they are not interesting when all the game is unlock currency to make game easier. Much better for me, in my opinion, is either the character weapon progression, where you play a character enough to unlock new things, or you have loadouts, and as you play the game, you can unlock different loadouts. That for me is like perfection. But I can't tell you how much I hate these systems that are all about getting a currency and make the game easier. So those are my thoughts. Those are my ratings. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. For those on stream, thanks again for your support and being members on the channel. And for now, this has been Nate. You can also call me Nathan. Please never call me Nathaniel, and I will see you guys next time. See you later.